My name is Henri, and I'm here to speak about, well, you know it, performance. So since my clicker's not working, I'm going to go straight with the keyboard, which I don't like using, but, well, that's not working either. Oh, now it is. Okay, so do I have a... Oh, right, my clicker's working. Man, I've just wasted a bit of time. So we are back online. As much as I've been doing a little bit of traveling, I'm actually more than happy to do online presentations because it provides the reach, and not everyone is ready to travel again, so I totally get it. So welcome to today's presentation. And I do want to thank the good people, well, the good person, that is Brian, and his whole team over at CFE and today's event, jam.dev. I've participated in the past. I'm really delighted to be back. And, I guess the subtitle is that it came from the edge. Well, I come from Toronto, as he mentioned earlier, the greatest city on the planet. My name is Henri Helvetica on the Twitter sphere and actually on Mastodon as well, if you kind of hang out there. You could also find me and my team over at Real Web Page Test, the venerable web page test. It's the place I work at. And it's the tool that I'll talk about a little later as well, because we are going to be talking about performance today. And as Brian mentioned, hashtag devs who run. Because I am a bit of a distance runner, I like to encourage people to sort of stay active, and running is how I stay active. The other thing that I did want to mention is in Toronto, I do run this thing called the Jamstack Toronto Meetup. It's been a little dormant, but shh, don't tell anyone. I'm coming back. And yeah, I also run the Toronto Web Performance Group. And again, performance is something that we're going to talk about today. I've been delighted running that group. I've had great presentations. You can look both up on the internet, I guess, or on Meetup. Join, because I do online streams, as well as we'll progress at some point back to in person sometime very soon for the Toronto people out there. Now, a few months ago, oh no, not even this month, earlier this month, the State of JavaScript volume 2022 was released. And like everyone else, I scanned through it, read it. I thought it was super interesting. But, we didn't really cover some of the areas that I like to talk about, which is performance. So yes, it was all about JavaScript because the importance of JavaScript right now to the sort of the web cannot be understated. I think the web would not be where it is today without JavaScript, because guess what? We do everything online. You're probably sitting at home and you may have bought a coffee on your sort of mobile device and went and picked it up because you don't want to sit in line. Last night, you're kind of like, man, I'm kind of hungry, got nothing in the fridge. You probably looked up Uber Eats, ordered something online, and had it delivered. Thank you, JavaScript. We literally do everything online. In fact, on Monday, in a few days, I guess 4 or 5 days, I'm actually going to buy my ticket to the Boston Marathon. That's going to be happening mid-April. I'm going to be running the 5K there, but I will be buying my ticket online. Super duper important. But you might ask yourself, how did we get here? Well, I'll tell you, it started with a little bit of HTML. Then it moved to a little bit more CSS. And then we added a bunch of JavaScript. Honestly, we added a ton of JavaScript. But we needed it because JavaScript provided the interactivity that we needed to get where we are today, to be able to order stuff online, all the other things that we take care of online. But, I am going to be here today, or I am here today, pardon me, to talk about JavaScript and its impact on performance. And to do so, I'm going to look at JavaScript and the data that's out there online for us to sort of consume. So, welcome to the State of JavaScript edition 2022, and it's a performance profile app. I couldn't fit that in, but I thought it was cool. So let's go. One of the opening lines, if not the opening line in the State of JavaScript 2022, is this one right here. After years of relative stability, many are now beginning to question the status quo. What is the status quo? Well, that you could sort of dump a bunch of JavaScript online and it's no big deal. Well, it is becoming a bit of a big deal. Actually, earlier or late last year at the Jamstack conference in the Bay, which I was supposed to be at, but I couldn't make, Jessica from the Angular team mentioned this right here. It's the natural evolution of the ecosystem of the web. Yes, the web has gotten a bit more detailed and we could do so much more with it. It's actually almost an essential service, so it should be very robust. But she also added that that's why a lot of people are thinking about performance now. Well, I personally believe that you should never have not thought about performance, but I'm happy people are considering it. Something else that was mentioned in that same panel that she was speaking in during that conference, Fred from Astro mentioned the following. Everyone sees now that performance is important and you can't avoid it anymore. Again, I don't believe you should have avoided it in the first place, but I understand times change. Something else that was mentioned in the JavaScript survey, the state of JavaScript, front-end frameworks like Solid and Quick are suggesting that React might not have all the answers after all. I'm going to wedge in enhance in there as well, but that's certainly something that you want to think about because we're going to look at some data a little later. And speaking of frameworks, they also mentioned that some are making us reconsider how much code we really need to ship to the client. Again, a very important statement right there because we are shipping a lot of code to the clients and it's having detrimental effects. So let's start to look at some of the things that we're going to look at today or talk about. If you look at this screenshot right here, that is from the State of JavaScript 2021. I took a screenshot here because I love this layout. It kind of reminds me of like a subway map. I'm a subway type. You can see that, say from 2018 onwards, or even 2019, things really kind of exploded. In terms of like the frameworks that are available to us to use, everyone's sort of own, opinion on how, a framework should operate, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The point is here that, there are a lot of choices. And, it kept going on and on and on because you can see some of the more familiar names here as well. So what I'd like to do today is we're going to look at some data with regards to JavaScript in general, and then we're going to sort of dive into some of the more, I'd say, popular frameworks and see what their data is like online. There's so much that we can cover, but I've sort of honed in on some areas that I think you might find interesting. So let's look at this data. Now, as a little disclaimer, everything that I do talk about is on mobile. Why is that? Well, you have to realize that mobile is pretty much the client of choice at this point. And we're also, you have to, if you start to look at the data, say current, which is about 66% of the web is being accessed on mobile right now. And this turn took place probably around 2016, I think the fall of 2016. So we're at a point right now where this is never, ever going to change. All right. So you have to remember that. And in fact, I'll hit you with some more data since I have it in my head. Once you get into some of the top sites, so say top 100,000, top 10,000, top 1,000, the percentage of access is around 80 to 88% all on mobile. So you have to keep this kind of data in mind. So let's start to talk about JavaScript and the web. Now, at the median, P50, we are on average sending about 461 kilobytes of JavaScript down the wire. All right. I mean, it's not the best, but it is what it is. Now, if you start to look at the data year over year, we are up 8% from the previous year. All right. Well, that's not the best news, but whatever. We'll work with it, right? But at P75, we are sending 857 kilobytes of JavaScript down the wire. I'll spare you the news about P90 because it's basically a meg, but we are in that kind of territory where, hey, a bit of an Amber Alert because that's a lot of JavaScript. Well, here's why. Because there's also unused JavaScript that we have to take a look at. And this is something that is also growing in importance because at P50, we are leaving 162 kilobytes of unused JavaScript. It got parsed and all, but it's not being used. Now, that turns into 35% of unused JavaScript at P50. And that's just at P50. At P75, we are up to 40% of unused JavaScript. And at P90, we're at 44.2%. And in fact, the numbers indicate that at P90, we are leaving behind over 600 kilobytes of JavaScript. Some of this data that I'm using today is accessible and available, from the Web Almanac by the HTTP Archive, a fantastic trove of data that comes out once a year. Shout outs to Rick Viscomi and the entire team over there. This is very important data because once again, we are seeing at the very start of this conversation that there's a lot of JavaScript being used, sent down the wire, but also a lot of JavaScript that's left unused. Very important detail. Now, something that I wanted to mention about the Web Almanac, all that data, all that information comes from the HTTP archive, which, by the way, uses web page test under the hood. I just had to add that. We'll get into that a little later. Now, something else that's pretty important in JavaScript, or on the web in general, first and third-party JavaScript. Now, the importance there is that you have to realize that third-party JavaScript is something that you have pretty much little control over, outside of not using it or using it. Everything else is pretty much out of your hands. So let's take a look at some data around third and first-party JavaScript. And in fact, it's going to be mostly third. At the median, P50, 292 kilobytes of the JavaScript that you're using, or 63%, is third party. So over half of the JavaScript that you're sending down the wire, you actually have no control over. And sometimes you have no realization of what's going on. Hello, ad networks. All right. I jumped over P75. I went straight to P90 to give you the real deal. At the 90th percentile, we have over 1,000 kilobytes of JavaScript, or 73%. That's third party. Again, we're talking about a lot of JavaScript that you may not have control over. These are important details because, again, it adds to the fact that JavaScript, which is important to the interactivity of your site, which is also potentially toxic to your site, a lot of it you have no control over. So these are things that you want to keep in mind and sometimes just simply investigate. Now, I'm mentioning here long tasks, and this is sort of like a Macedon of data that I sort of picked here and there to sort of paint the picture. Long tasks, which are very important to mobile especially, are essentially tasks that are longer than 50 milliseconds. All right. And they're all added up, and they're part of the TBT index, or at least metric, that you might know if you pop the hood of, or if you use Lighthouse, and you'll see the 6 metrics that are involved. TBT is one of them, and the long tasks are absolutely correlated with to the TBT. Now, on mobile, they tend to be 2.5 to 3 times worse on your device. All right, and worse than a desktop, obviously. So this is to, again, illustrate the following. We are mostly using the web on our mobile device. we are sending a lot of JavaScript down the wire through the web to this mobile device, and long tasks, and eventually TBT, by the way, which is total blocking time, are 2.5 to 3 times worse on mobile. And I'm going to add this little bit as well that I probably should have slid in on a slide. Total blocking time, one of the 6 metrics that are well known, again, if you do some testing, is worth 30% of your Lighthouse score. So again, I'm bringing all this together to show you that JavaScript and the mishandling of JavaScript is very important to the user experience. All right, let's move on. Let's look at some more data. Now, as I mentioned, there's a lot of data that I could go through. Some of it you might be familiar with, some of it not. But the one thing you must be familiar with, and in all likelihood, from developers to marketing people to CMOs to SEO people to technical SEO people, the Core Web Vitals. Now, the Core Web Vitals are going to turn, I think, 3 later on this year in May. And they basically were able to introduce a lot of people to the idea of good user experience, the health and wellness of a site through the LCP, which is largest contentful paint, through the CLS, which is cumulative layout shift, is the page janky or not, and through FID, which is first input delay. Now, FID is the interactivity metric, which essentially means where JavaScript is involved. Now, I'm going to talk about it. However, it is possibly going to be replaced, and to be very frank, in all likelihood, will be replaced. I think they're working out the details. Because through the research over time, since it was introduced, it was seen as potentially not the best metric to discuss interactivity. INP, which is being discussed more and more, is likely going to be the metric to replace it. INP, which means interaction to next paint. So that being said, I talked about Core Web Vitals. Let's look at Core Web Vitals. And what we're going to do right now is look at Core Web Vitals, and specifically some of the more popular frameworks that are out there, and see what they're saying, see what their presence online is all about. Let's look at Gatsby. Most of you may be familiar with Gatsby, sort of like the darling for a minute over, especially on the sort of Jamstack side of town, may have fallen slightly out of favor. All good. But let's look at some of the data. So Gatsby sites per the web right now, and the data coming from the CRUX, which is the Chrome User Experience Report, says the following. 37 or 38% of Gatsby sites have good Core Web Vitals. What does that mean, Henri? Well, it means that they have good LCP, they have good CLS, and they have good FID. All right, so just about a third, not the best. The point of this moment right here is to connect some dots, because I'm going to now tell you that Gatsby sites, per the CRUX report, per what's available to look at on the web right now, are shipping 881 kilobytes of JavaScript at the median. Remember now, I mentioned earlier today that at the median right now, the web is shipping 461 kilobytes. Do the math. All right. We're talking almost twice as much at the median. Now, it's impossible to talk about web, the web performance, JavaScript, without talking about scores, specifically Lighthouse scores. Do you know what the Lighthouse score of Gatsby sites are online? I'll tell you, 34. Okay, so what do we have now? We have a lot of JavaScript being sent down the wire at the median, and we have a Lighthouse score that is below 50. Not a huge deal, but I want you to think about that. By the way, the median Lighthouse score across the web right now is 31. So they're above average, but there's still room to improve. No big deal. But again, this is what is being sort of, this is a snapshot of the web as we speak. Speaking of another darling of the internet, Next.js. So let's look at Next sites. All right. Shall we? We shall. Good core web vitals of Next.js sites across the web. Again, a snapshot of what we're seeing via the Chrome User Experience Report. 27% of Next.js sites have good core web vitals. Again, good CLS, good LCP, and good FID. Could be a little better. Now, let's see what kind of JavaScript they're shipping down the wire at the median. At the median, Next sites are shipping 914 kilobytes of JavaScript. All right? You do the math. Lighthouse score of Next.js sites across the web at the median is 31. You ever see that meme where that dude who's got glasses is just like, I don't know, you tell me. I don't know, you tell me. Okay, so I'm having fun right here. Finally, we're going to look at React sites. Of course, you cannot talk about this without talking about React. React, by the way, which I believe will turn 10 sometime in May. I got to double check that. But React, ye of, many developers online, has just under 33% of good core web vitals. Okay. However, where it gets a bit more alarming in a kind of like Amber Alert, at the median, React sites are sending just over 1,000 kilobytes, or basically a meg of JavaScript down the wire. And again, folks, this is at the median. And I again get you to sort of think and do the math, because what did I say in terms of unused JavaScript? At the median, the web is more or less shipping about 30-some% of unused JavaScript. Okay, so this would not be amazing news for people running Gatsby sites. But again, there are ways of dealing with this, but this is a general snapshot of what's going on. And they are ye of Lighthouse score of 29. All right. Again, not amazing. The median's 31. They're not that far off the median, but it's still not a great user experience so far. And finally, we're going to look at Vue.js. Only 27% about have good core web vitals. At the median, they're sending 853 kilobytes down the wire, and their Lighthouse scores 24. Okay, not amazing. Again, these are not crimes. This is just about letting you know what is actually out there on the web. I've always said that web performance is an investigative process. You have to dig into the details and find out what's going on. All right, I'm going to round this off real quickly. So let's talk about opportunities, because we may sit there and point out what's wrong, but we need to talk about what could be done differently, where some of the challenges are, what are the P1, P2s, P3s in terms of like emergencies. So when it comes to Next.js sites, actually, before I get into that, the opportunities bit, we at Web Page Test have a great relationship with the people at HTTP Archive. I talked about it before. They are the authors or responsible for the almanac. They use Web Page Test under the hood, but we also have these conversations and we sort of dig up more data that may not be published, but we keep it on hand so that we know where to lean in, we'll say. So when it comes to Next.js sites, or sites in general, we recently, or I know Rick Viscomi did a talk on this, but he recently did this sort of audit and looked at some of the pain points and where some of the greatest improvements can be done. And I'm going to go through a few of the frameworks again, because it didn't have data for everything, but let's look at Next.js sites. Now, out of the 5 top issues, 4 were FID related, meaning they were interactivity related, meaning JavaScript was involved. So, for example, the fourth top issue when it came to Next.js sites were related to the main thread. All right, so 87% of pages, shouldn't say pages, Next.js sites had main thread issues. 77% of them had boot up time issues, and that was the number 2 issue on per the sort of query that we did. And as well, later on down the sort of like list of priorities, but 81% of pages or Next.js sites had issues with unused JavaScript. Let's look at some of the same data with React. Again, 4 out of the top 5 issues had FID/interactivity related challenges. Number 1 was boot up time, and that's React sites. 83% of sites had boot up time issues. 89% of sites had main thread issues. And again, top 5, this one was number 4. And it's further down the page, they had unused JavaScript issues. 84% of their sites did. And I think to close that out, I'm going to talk about Vue. 3 of the top 5 were FID related. Again, interactivity, JavaScript being in focus when it came to failed audits. So, for example, third in their challenges, boot up time at 73%. Much later down the page, I think it was issue 11, 84% had unused JavaScript challenges. And that's not to say that this is, the biggest challenge for them, but these are things that were sort of like, correlated in terms of like, okay, the search, the audit was done, and we saw where we were able to create the biggest change in terms of user experience. So in rounding, now what? Well, some of you may have seen this tweet came out a couple of days ago. I had to add it to the deck. Talk about if you use React, you should be using a React framework, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Andrew's on the core team. My personal belief, whether you use React, whether you use a React framework or any other framework for that matter, I think testing is all you really need to do. All right. It's unfortunate because a lot of people just sort of go live and they don't do enough testing, certainly not enough performance testing. And some of these issues would have come up if you had done a couple, audits. And in fact, I'm a big believer of the following. There are no mistakes when it comes to web performance. They're really just oversights. You didn't understand something or you didn't take a closer look, and that may have just sort of like gone by. So again, I mentioned earlier today, I work at Web Page Test. I used it before I started to work here, Web Page Test by Catchpoint. It is a fantastic tool. We're just there. It's a free tool, by the way. We're just there to help you sort of try to understand web performance, try to take a closer look at the details, because the web, like, we are not in Kansas anymore. This is not, what do you call that thing? like early Kijiji, or if you're American, I guess what's that one where the classifieds? I don't know, I forgot what it's called. But either way, um, the web is complicated, and today's web certainly very detailed, but it's very important that you know what's going on as a web developer. And I'm going to close it out like this. We released a free course earlier this year, late last year, lightning fast web performance by none other than Scott Gell, an amazing performance engineer, teammate of mine. And it's really just leveling up, getting people to understand performance, how it's changed over time. Again, we are not in Kansas anymore. And it's an absolutely free course. And this is something that you can bang out on the weekend, at the library or whatever, wherever you go. But you can scan that QR code and check it out. Man, I guess I should have had a link as well. But I'll probably post a link somewhere in the chat or something like that. That being said, that's it. I hope I was able to paint the picture for you in terms of the importance of web performance, what is actually happening on the web right now, a snapshot of the resources that are out there on the web, and especially JavaScript, because it is a very important resource when it comes to everything that we need to do. However, it is also sort of like a little toxic and is contributing to some of the challenges that we're seeing right now, which is why there are some great people out there like the good people at Enhance that are trying to make a change there, and others you've seen like Astro and people like, oh my God, Quake, et cetera, et cetera. Anyways, that's it for me. Merci. Thank you very much for your time. And merci beaucoup, as we like to say. And that's the end of the show.
Thanks, Henri. That was great. I think I didn't see any questions yet because I think people are just too busy nodding, going yes, yes, I know.
I mean, I can go to lunch early. I don't know.
No. I got questions. I'm just saying,
sure,
like,
dude.
everybody's just like, you can see in the chat, people are like, yep, this is me.
Okay.
Yeah. So you had some really great data, and I was asking people if they were surprised by any of it, and I guess fortunately or unfortunately, I guess fortunately in the sense that they're aware, unfortunately in the sense that that they it's not like they know that the problem is bad. So like none of them, everybody was just kind of like, no, not surprised by any of this data. And I think you get at something we've already been talking about a lot today, which is that, and something I harp on. I have nothing against React. I actually think React is a great framework, and it's done a lot. But it's not just React, right? We blame React, I guess, because I mean, it represents so much, like it's become the dominant framework by far, right? Yeah. So, but we threw it at lots of problems that React isn't intended to solve, right? I mean, do you think that's part of the problem? We just threw it at everything.
So, I'm going to make a part of my discussion, I try to, make it as simple as possible to sort of like onboard you into the conversation. And, the one thing I kind of mentioned once in a sort of chat during a podcast is that I find that the React developer today, all right, who's been sort of told like, hey, this is, how you do the web now, you're being taught React in boot camps, et cetera, et cetera. I think the React developer of today is the WordPress developer of yesteryear, all right? In the sense that this is being described as like the sort of like framework of choice, just like a few years ago, several, in fact, people jumped on WordPress for whatever reason, and they kind of stuck with it. And right now, what's happening is that, just like WordPress is having, performance challenges, maybe React is as well, and this is not to pick on React. It's the point that people are just being, taught how to sort of like use React in its simplest form, but not deal with the details of modern development. All right. Modern development is requiring more sort of like the minutia of like, sending something online now is not what it used to be. All right. The details have to be looked after. And which is why, and again, I'm throwing in WordPress, don't, I have to apologize for that, but, they have a performance team now, looking after WordPress. React may or may not, I'm not sure, but there's generally a sort of like intelligentsia of people looking at performance at every step. And right now, the web is showing us that the majority of developers are not paying attention. And with that being said, React is sort of like, expressing itself in full bloom and blossom as a framework that ships a lot of JavaScript. All right. And that also comes down to people potentially not having performance built into their workflow. Right. And these are things that you'll notice only when you get into the details. It's like driving a car, A to B, everything's good, but some cars blow blue smoke. All right. And if you pay attention, you'll see that blue smoke. Right now, people are potentially not paying attention at the blue smoke or whatever you want to call it that's coming out of the web, and we are here to sort of like highlight that and hopefully educate you on how to sort of have create like leaner sites and create better user experiences.
Yeah, and I think you see that amongst like a lot of the new tools, and even React themselves with the server components seems to be headed in the direction of like we need to start to find ways to ship less JavaScript. But I do want to get to, we had a couple of questions and we got like 5 minutes left, so I want to make sure we get to them. So Chris asks, why do you think the go-to metric why do you think the go-to metric will be changing when what's been the standard for a while has been the mobile first environment, and that hasn't changed? So I think he was talking about, you mentioned that the go-to metric, the
INP and NFID.
Yeah.
Is that the one?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
when you look back at things like Core Web Vitals, and even prior to that, just say when Lighthouse was introduced, there are some metrics that were around when Lighthouse was introduced that are not around today. All right. So, for example, largest contentful paint, which is seen as probably the number 2 metric behind TBT, was once experimental. It was like, we're not sure what we're going to do about this, but we think, it should be mentioned, because there was this thing called FCP, and then there was first meaningful paint, and largest contentful paint was like an experiment. They found out through research meaningful paint was meaningless. And FID over time has been regarded now as probably not the best metric. Why? Because they were noticing that sites with poor user experiences were still getting good FID scores. So they had to go back to the lab and figure out like what to look at and really try to understand the enormous challenge that is, processing JavaScript and what is happening during an interaction. And they found out that interaction to next paint was likely the successor, and FID would have to be sunsetted. It's not official yet, but it's likely going to be the case. And this is just classic research coming to fruition.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I think, metrics are always important, but in any situation, once you create the metric, people start, basically trying to work towards that metric and often create workarounds. So you end up having to change the metric. I mean, it's normal. Okay. Yep. So Eric asks, wondering how you feel about partial hydration as a tactic to reduce unused JS and expensive main threads.
Now, I was going to say, like, I think I mentioned it at the start, there are a lot of solutions that are being proposed right now. and sort of like bandied around. And we are still, I personally believe, in an experimental phase, right? I mean, I say experimental, but we're in a phase where people are trying different techniques. I think, I think there's going to be an enhanced talk a little later today. Is that correct?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I mean, you're going to hear how they are tackling this issue of hydration. Because there's partial, there's I think is it Astro or Quick that's doing something around like it's less than partial hydration, and I forget, they have a name for it. But again, I think
the islands.
Pardon me?
Islands architecture, I think, is what you're referring to.
Like that, yeah. Like there's a bunch right now, and they're all competing for our attention. But the point is, to me also, and something that I also want to mention is that we know we have a race. Since I run, we have an A to B race, right? Start line, finish line. The finish line is a good user experience. What you do between now and that finish line is more or less up to you, but hopefully you're not cheating. You're doing something that makes some sense. And then, we look at the result at the end, right? So, I was talking to someone else about this. You could have 5 people lining up for a track meet. One's in spikes, one's in running shoes, one's in heels, one's in Kodiak boots. All right. So they're going to make it to the end. First, how fast are they going to get there? And B, was it like a proper experience? And that's what I think happens in the end. The last thing I want to say is this. I think it's important to get into a particular framework, whatever technologies they employ under the hood, and deep dive. All right. Because I think one of the challenges right now is that there's so much being introduced, so many new techniques. People are like hopping around like it's musical chairs, and they don't really get to really kind of master the framework and the sort of like little intricacies that they're like, oh, I know how to fix this. Boom, 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 boom. And they're off and running, running again. I'm sorry about that. But the point of the matter is partial hydration has a use case. That's without a doubt. All right. When you start to look at the data, what is happening in your particular use case, if it makes sense, run with it. Again, apologies about the running, but yeah, that's sort of like my answer that I want to provide, because I think that a lot of people are like, well, I hear this is better, so they suddenly jump over to this next framework without really exploring the details of one they may have been using for a little while. I know people who use WebPageTest. Well, I know a lot of people use WebPageTest. I know people who use WordPress, and they can provide a really good experience, performing experience with WordPress. The data shows that the majority of people don't. All right. So that's why I think that, the technology you pick to work with, really get into the details and find out why it's good or why it's not amazing. And then you can move on that way. But again, there are use cases out there for partial hydrations, and they're all over the net where they're like, yo, it's working for me. So it's, I think that's part of the challenge. I hope that answered the question. I know it's a little long-winded, but, this is like, this is my little get off my lawn moment.
Yeah, no problem with the long-winded. So we got one last question, and
let's go.
It's from Bapti says, "Where'd you get your cat?"
This?
Yeah.
Oh man, this is a gift.
Like
yeah, thanks for asking. Those are flamingos, by the way, and palm trees. It was a birthday gift actually years ago. So thank you very much, man. I haven't worn it in a while, so thanks for noticing.
Flamingos and palm trees. That's supposed to be me. Like I'm the one in Florida.
I mean, like
palm trees in Toronto.
If you want to wear a toque in Florida, go ahead, dude.
It's true. I wouldn't be wearing. All right. Thanks, Henri. This was amazing. I really appreciate it. I learned a lot, and I think everybody. I mean, I saw just so many comments going on in the chat. So people really. Thanks so much.
Hey, man, appreciate it. If you have any questions, folks, find me on the Twitter sphere. I'll be happy to kick it, banter, tweet you back, whatever.